Sponsors of an important initiative petition in Oregon are gathering signatures right now despite the pandemic. The initiative, if it gets on the ballot in November and passes, would change the way Oregon determines the geographic boundaries of electoral districts for the state legislature and for our U.S. congressional seats. Welcome to Oregon News and Views from Shoset Advance. I'm Alan Zundel, and I have speaking with me today Norm Turrill of People Not Politicians Oregon. Hello, Norm. Good to see you again.
Good morning.
So this must be quite a challenge, and I imagine you had to change some of your strategy to gather signatures, not only in the midst of the pandemic, but while media attention is on the economic problems and on the Black Lives Matter protests and all that. So how is it going?
We got our ballot title approval at the Oregon Supreme Court in late March. And by then the pandemic was well underway. And so we had to shift our strategy entirely to a strategy that really has never been done before. We're on entirely unexplored territory. And we've come up with a strategy, a three-pronged strategy. First is a massive mailing directly to registered voters in Oregon. And there's about 500,000, 500,000 pieces of mail that we mailed, which represents, with multiple household registered voters and households, about over 1 million people, registered voters that have received our mailing. That we think can get about 10% return, and with an average of 2 signatures per household, that's about 100,000 signatures right there. Together with that, the second prong of the strategy is to email to all of our constituent organizations of the coalition. And there's quite a number of these organizations, and so they together represent about 100,000 people in Oregon. And we think we might get half of those to actually return a petition. And so that might be 50,000 signatures. And together, those two prongs of the strategy will be what we need, 150,000 signatures to qualify for the ballot. Of course, there's invalid signatures there, of course. And so the third prong of the strategy is to get people to pass the petition individually to their family, friends, and neighbors, and to their personal networks, and hopefully get out on the street at some point, and those will get us tens of thousands of other signatures, and that should hopefully put us over the top for qualifying for the ballot. So I think we have a real shot at being successful.
And it's important that you get that done this year, because the U.S. Census is only done every 10 years. It's done this year, and then the redistricting is next year. Won't get a shot at changing the process for another 10 years if you can't get this on the ballot.
Well, it's important that we do it now for several reasons, and that's one of them. But also Oregon, it looks like in the census, will get a 6th congressional district. And so it becomes even more important because all the congressional district boundaries will have to change to fit another district in the state. That also brings up that we have a deadline for mailing the petitions back, which is June 26th, which is Friday. And that's so that the mail can reach our headquarters in Salem, and so that we can process the petitions and then get them to the Secretary of State by the real deadline of July 2nd at 5 p.m. It's very important that any petitions that are after that June 26th date be hand carried to the campaign. And we are setting up depots probably all over the state in major cities so that they can be then transported to Salem to get into the final batch of petitions.
So let's put right up front where people can get an initiative petition. That's at your website at peoplenotpoliticiansoregon.com.
Correct.
They can find a petition, download it, and mail it back to you. What they got, like a little less than 2 weeks to get that to you unless they're going to hand deliver it to one of these depots you just mentioned.
That's right. So it's very important that everybody hop on this and work as hard as they can for the next 2 weeks and help us put it over the top.
First of all, disclosure on my part, I served with you on a commission in the summer of 2017 that was put together by then Secretary of State, the late Dennis Richardson.
Correct.
And there were members of a variety of parties and some civic groups, even some non-affiliated voters. And we worked on determining a process that would improve on our current process or even replace it entirely. Is the proposal that is being that this initiative is putting forward very similar to the one that the commission came up with?
It is similar in that that proposal was incomplete and it went to the legislature at that time. The legislature thoroughly ignored the proposal from Dennis Richardson's office. And we then started forming the coalition around the idea and further drafted it with the coalition's drafting committee into the proposal that you see now.
Right now, basically what happens is any redistricting is done by the state legislature. And if it's not vetoed by the governor, then it would go forward and become the plan. So when we look at how the new process would work, given that it gets on the ballot and passes, essentially there would be an independent board rather than the state legislature that determines the districts, that examines, population shifts and whether any borders need to be adjusted one way or the other. And it would be composed of members of about a third of the largest political party, a third of the second largest political party, and the final third made up of non-affiliated voters or minor party members. And all of the members of the commission would have to be people that are not heavily engaged in a political process, but citizens who have been voting and have some qualifications for sitting on a board and determining the district.
Yeah, you've summarized it very well. It's actually based on a similar process that California invented and passed by initiative over 10 years ago now. And it, by all accounts, actually worked very well in California in choosing a commission. They had 15 members. We're proposing 12 members because Oregon's a smaller state. But the idea is very similar, to balance the political interests of the state so that the commissioners are forced to compromise in drawing the maps, and in that process the voters win instead of the incumbent politicians.
So let's look at a couple of the criticisms that I've heard or that maybe are coming up a lot. One of them is suspicion, I think, on the part of Democrats that just a ploy to take away some of the power of the legislature because it's in the hands of Democrats, and boost the power of Republicans because they would have equal representation on the commission despite not having equal numbers of registered voters. What would be the response to that?
Well, our opponents, including legislative leaders, want to make this a partisan issue. And it's not really a partisan issue, it's a process issue which affects all political parties equally. And we have set up the commission and designed it not to be representative of political parties, but to balance the political parties in the state. So again, the voters win instead of the politicians. We think that this is a better deal and will avoid the inherent conflicts of interest that the legislature has in being tempted to gerrymander the state.
How big a problem are we trying to address here? Are there that many seats either in Congress from Oregon or in the state legislature that could be redrawn in a way to make it more competitive? Because it seems like when you have lots of Democrats in urban areas and lots of Republicans in rural areas, maybe there's no way to get around the fact that those districts are going to reflect those parties.
Yeah, let's first allow that Oregon is not the most gerrymandered state in the country. I think Texas and North Carolina and Maryland probably get that prize. There is, in fact, parts of the state, Eastern Oregon will probably always be Republican, and the Portland metropolitan area will probably always be Democrats, but there's enough other districts in the state, particularly in the Willamette Valley and some of the coasts, that are more competitive and could be more competitive if they weren't drawn in such a way to be safe districts. The problem with safe districts is, of course, that voters have very little chance of changing their representation and holding their representatives accountable.
That may also include around Bend, because that's rapidly changing.
Yeah, Bend is another area now that's,
and maybe a few on the border of the Columbia River look like as they grow, they're becoming a little more competitive. It's not just a problem of political party representation, it's also gerrymandering to protect incumbents.
right.
We did a show a couple of weeks ago, right after the primary election, showing how whenever you have an incumbent running, you may as well just call the election off because they win almost all the time. Or really, this election, they all won. And it's likely to happen again in November. So is that really a bigger problem, protecting incumbents, than trying to give an advantage to a party?
Yeah, that's certainly a big part of it, because incumbency protection happens because of these safe districts that are formed. And something like 90 or 95% of incumbents are reelected. And after the partisan primaries, there's really no chance of the other party winning in the election, in the general election.
So anything else you've been hearing from people, myths or misunderstandings that you like to clear up while you got an opportunity?
Yeah, two I can think of. They complain that young people and newly naturalized people couldn't serve on the commission. And that's a design feature of the commission, that we intentionally wanted people that had some experience and knowledge of Oregon, people that understand the demographics and different communities of interest that are in Oregon. So they need to have been registered voters for at least 3 years. And that way we hopefully have some experience in the commission. It's not that we have anything against young people or naturalized citizens. The other complaint I hear is about minorities being somehow cut out of the process. Let me be frank that the current process in the legislature will give lip service to minorities and ethnic groups of various kinds. But when it comes right down to it, they're more interested in preserving their incumbency than to be listening to any minority group. And so the commission process will probably be much better about listening to communities of interest in minorities and ethnic groups than the legislative process that happens now. So one part of the initiative is to set out strict criteria by which the commission would work. And two very important criteria, besides the equal population and some others that are in current law, is one is communities of interest and the other one is competitiveness, are important criteria that, if can be balanced with the other criteria, will help enhance the ability of the voters to choose better representation and hold their representatives accountable.
Okay, another criticism I've heard is from third-party advocates, and essentially it comes down to the idea that by giving seats to the two major parties, it's baking in the two-party system to the detriment possibly of third parties who may be trying to grow. Anything to that criticism?
The way the legislature does the process now, redistricting, the third parties are totally cut out. They don't have any direct say in the process because they don't have any seats in the legislature. And by giving them equal representation with the major parties in the commission, together with the non-affiliated voters, at least they have some influence on the process. And we think that's better than what happens now.
And I remember when we were on the commission, there were a number of third-party advocates and only one Democrat, really, because I think most of the Democrats were avoiding that commission. But it was a big deal for third parties to make sure that the possibility of multi-member districts was not precluded. And a multi-member district, of course, would be one that elects more than one person to a seat, which opens the door to proportional representation in some form. Is the language of this initiative also at least leaving a door open for that?
Yeah, we haven't said anything about the number of legislators in each district in the initiative. The legislature conceivably could pass a statute at some point establishing multi-member districts, and then the commission would just pick up from there. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but it's still a possibility, and we haven't precluded it in the initiative. This leads me to think that there's actually some other ways of dealing with redistricting. If we had an alternative voting method of some sort, like proportional representation, we could go do away with the district lines altogether. Or with multi-member districts, at least the districts would be larger, and so would be proportionally better representation than what we do now. But those are all different issues that we can't solve in one initiative, and so we're doing what we can with the redistricting process as it is.
So if this got into the Constitution, there's nothing there that would make it impossible to change it further, like adding preference voting, like ranked choice voting or star voting, or multi-member district, maybe even proportional representation. I don't know. The legislature could probably set that up for the whole electoral process, although that's very unlikely.
Well, this is a little off topic, but there is a provision of the state constitution that allows what we now call ranked choice voting. And it has just not been used over the century or so since.
I want to re-emphasize to people that are watching that the deadline for mailing in signatures is June 26th. Correct. That's not postmarked. That's trying to get it to you, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's just so like ballots. Postmarks don't count.
So really, if you're interested in helping this initiative out, they should do it right away. And again, the website is peoplenotpoliticiansoregon.com, and they can find a lot of answers to other questions there. I was looking through the website this morning, and I saw a lot of frequently asked questions that had good answers, so people can get a lot more information there. I also want to emphasize, you got to put that Oregon at the end of People Not Politicians, or else you end up with the website for Oklahoma, I think.
Yeah, there's another similarly named organization in Oklahoma.
Okay. So, any final words?
Well, you can find 3 kinds of petitions there. There's the single signature petition, 5 signature petitions, and 10 signature petitions, all together with instructions for each variation. You can download those, get your family, friends, and neighbors to sign it too. You don't have to be limited to your household. Very important to sign the certification at the bottom as well as sign above for your voter signature. That's one of the common mistakes we see on the petitions that are coming in. People somehow think that they're not the circulator, and so they don't have to certify their own signature, but they do. So sign at the bottom too, thank you. And together we can do this.
Yeah, it's read the instructions before you finish it and mail it in. It's not real complex, but you do have to be careful to follow the instructions.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being with us, and we hope this, I mean, especially not only for the merits of the proposal, but for the idea that you can actually have a citizen's petition succeed in the midst of a pandemic, and doing it by non-traditional methods would be a great thing, I think, for democracy.
Thank you for the attention, Alan.
Okay. That's it for this week. Join us again next week on Oregon News and Views, which you can find through our YouTube channel, Social Advance, and our Facebook page, or just go to our website at socialadvance.org.